Imagine an operation where cats are made into spies. Or perhaps a scenario where the government covers up excusing a scientist's horrible acts and experiments only because it benefits them. That is exactly what we're talking about today and more as we dive into the top 10 concerning government secrets that were leaked on Reddit. Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Operation Northwoods. This is an operation that comes from the time of the Cold War, and it has to do with the tense relationship that was seen between the United States and Cuba at the time. Operation Northwoods, should it have gone forward, would have been a project that saw violence committed against US and Cuban civilians with the blame placed on the Cuban government. Messed up, right? These acts would include fake attacks of high magnitude, the hijacking of planes, the sinking of boats, like some really serious stuff. Basically, they just wanted to harm themselves just to place the blame on Cuba, and they wanted to do this in order to justify an all-out war with Cuba, but thankfully some people at the time had decided that this likely wasn't the smartest or the best route to take, and the idea was scrapped. For a long time this was hidden from the public until years later documents were revealed that showed this very dark truth. In our number 9 spot today we have Operation Cottage. This operation was a tactical maneuver which completed the Aleutian Islands campaign in World War II, and it was a joint services assault on the island of Kiska. On August 15, 1943, Allied military forces landed on the island with the aim to eliminate the Imperial Japanese forces that had occupied the island since June 1942. Unbeknownst to the Allied forces, however, the Japanese forces had secretly abandoned the island 2 weeks earlier under the cover of thick fog using submarines and ships. So basically what I'm saying is that when the Allied forces landed here, they were unopposed. Unfortunately, that doesn't mean that no one lost their lives. There were around 313 casualties, which were a result of stray Japanese landmines, vehicle accidents, and a series of friendly fire incidents. Most of the friendly fire incidents were between Canadian and American troops as they mistook each other for Japanese forces as they came from opposite sides of the island. In our number 8 spot today we have rabbit telepathy. This is an experiment that was originally conducted after World War II but wasn't brought to light until many years later, well into the 2000s. Said to have been a part of, quote, Soviet and Czechoslovakian parapsychology research that was done from the end of World War II through to the Cold War era, this is one of the most grisly and truly unbelievable experiments that were conducted. Basically, they were trying to use rabbits to communicate with submarines, which is just already a bizarre kind of concept on a regular level, but of course the way in which they conducted this experiment was wrong and inhumane and truly just very cruel. Just a little heads up, if you're sensitive to animal stuff, I would maybe just skip over this one. You know, I wanna be safe, okay? So for the test, they would take a mother rabbit who had recently just had bunnies. They would keep the mother in a lab on shore, and then they would take the bunnies down with them in the submarine. Slowly, one by one, they would take the life of the bunnies, and each time they did, the mother rabbit's brain would produce a detectable and recordable reaction. Is this one of the worst things I've ever heard? Yes. What's even worse is that the report then goes on to say that other examples of, quote, animal telepathy research continued into the 1970s, and that it included other animals such as dogs, bears, birds, insects, and fish. I can't imagine they were, but let's just hope that these other tests weren't quite so cruel and inhumane. In our number 7 spot today we have Operation LAC. Operation LAC, which is short for Large Area Coverage, was a Cold War era project that involved the US Army Chemical Corps. Basically, it was a test that was designed to see whether or not it would be possible or feasible to taint a large area by dropping chemical agents from planes. To test this idea, they dropped, quote, a myriad of microscopic particles from planes covering an area that is said to span from the Rockies to the Atlantic, from Canada to the Gulf of Mexico. So yes, definitely a large area indeed. In fact, it was so large that this is actually the largest test that the Chemical Corps had ever undertaken. According to the declassified documents relating to this operation, the tests, quote, did not provide the Corps with nearly as much data as the Corps would like. And then it goes on to say that, quote, to obtain additional data, the Corps planned further tests for the next fiscal year. Okay, well that's a little daunting. While not necessarily the same operation, also in the Cold War era was a similar test conducted that targeted a neighborhood in St. Louis, Missouri. This test saw the area being sprayed with zinc cadmium sulfide. At the time, those local to the area were being told that, quote, the government was testing a smokescreen that could shield St. Louis from aerial observation in case the Russians attacked. But of course, decades later, documents revealed that the tests were actually a part of a biological weapons program. And to make matters even worse, the zinc-cadmium sulfide was linked to an increase in cancer among the residents of the neighborhood. In our number 6 spot today, we have the embassy missions. This is a secret that was hidden not only from the American people, but also the people that were being spied on and listened to, but it wasn't revealed until 2007 when a document was leaked. This document is one that named 38 different embassies and missions that were so-called targets of US surveillance. The document didn't quite make it clear whether or not these targets were being looked into by only the NSA or if the CIA and FBI were also involved. The document described certain things like bugging fax machines with devices that allowed them to listen in on conversations, and the document also listed the names of different programs that are used within the embassies. The document showed that the embassies targeted weren't just those of countries who seemed to be enemies with the United States, and instead included places like India and Mexico, Greece and Turkey. It appears as if the goal was to gain insider information into the diplomatic relations between the targets and the United States. The EU embassy in Washington, D.C. was one of the targets on this document, and this leak had the potential to have jeopardized one of the largest attempted free trade agreements in the world, because shortly after this all came out, negotiations were set to begin between the EU and the United States. The French president at the time made his anger about the situation very public and stated that all future negotiations will only be made under the agreement that the United States cease all unauthorized surveillance of any EU buildings or personnel. In our number 5 spot today, we have Operation Fast and Furious. No, this isn't another installment of the beloved franchise, although family is everything. This actually was a tactic that was used by the Arizona U.S. Attorney's Office and the Arizona Field Office of the United States Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, ATF, as they were conducting a series of sting operations from 2006 to 2011. Basically, the idea for this operation was to allow licensed firearm dealers to sell weapons to illegal buyers, hoping to track the firearms down later to Mexican drug cartel leaders so that they could then arrest them. So not only did this not lead to the results that they were hoping for, but it actually had terrible outcomes. Many of the firearms that were being tracked have been found at crime scenes on both sides of the United States-Mexico border, and one was even found at the scene where United States Border Patrol agent Brian Terry was killed. In our number 4 spot today, we have Operation Starfish Prime. This is an operation that took place in 1962, and it was a joint one between the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission and the Defense Atomic Support Agency. Basically, they detonated a thermonuclear device in the sky above the Pacific Ocean. They launched it from the Johnson Atoll using a Thor rocket, and once at an altitude of about 240 miles, they set it off, which ended up producing a yield of about 1.4 megatons. The electromagnetic pulse was so powerful and widespread that it disabled not only most of the equipment that was set up to measure it, but it also took out streetlights and caused telephone outages in Hawaii, nearly 900 miles away. The electrons released caused an aura that could be seen over most of the Pacific Ocean, and according to the documents, the quote visible phenomena due to the burst were widespread and quite intense, and apparently it was visible for days. In the end, it is said that the researchers weren't expecting such a powerful blast of electromagnetic pulse, and they were also anticipating that the electrons from the blast would get stuck in the Earth's own magnetic field for months, possibly even years, but alas, they did. This went on to create a radiation belt around the planet that eventually went on to disable at least 6 satellites, which included the world's first commercial satellite, only a few months after it was launched. The government didn't even tell AT&T what had happened until 2005. In our number 3 spot today, we have Acoustic Kitty. Apparently, in 1967, the CIA was spending millions of dollars trying to make cats into spies. I don't know why they chose the one animal that does not care what you want it to do, but they did, and Project Acoustic Kitty was born. The project basically involved implanting electronic spy equipment into real living cats who would then be trained to basically eavesdrop on unsuspecting people. This Cold War era plan was intended to be used on those in the Soviet Union, million. The project had a whole slew of issues, of course, because cats can get hungry and distracted, and unfortunately the first time this plan was being tested, there was a catastrophic outcome. The project of course was cancelled, and the researchers said that they believed they could train cats to move short distances, but that quote, "the environmental and security factors in using this technique in a real foreign situation forces us to conclude that for our intelligence purposes, it would not be practical." In our number 2 spot today we have the cat drop. Not really sure why the government is obsessed with cats, but here we go. Apparently the United States Office of Strategic Services, once upon a time, decided that the very best and most sensible way to ensure that bombs that had been dropped reached their intended naval targets was to strap them to cats and then drop them from planes. I know, it's absolutely horrific. Definitely not my plan. They thought up this strange project because for some reason they thought that the cats would just be able to avoid the water and instead direct themselves to the target. Strange in theory, catastrophic in reality. There of course is no way to prevent these animals from fainting midair, and if you were dropped from a plane suddenly with no parachute and a bomb strapped to you, you'd probably also faint, because what in the actual hell? Definitely one for the history books. We can all be thankful that this is not something that carried on for long. In our number 1 spot today we have Unit 731. The Imperial Japanese Army's Unit 731 conducted some pretty horrifying experiments during World War II that certainly are shocking to anyone who learns about them. The experiments were meant to be done as a way to prepare for biological warfare, but the process was gruesome and extremely inhumane. Different medical schools and universities provided doctors and other research staff to help conduct these experiments, and they used both prisoners and civilians as the guinea pigs for them. There were a bunch of different experiments that were conducted during this time, some of which involved injecting them with pathogens such as plague or cholera or anthrax. Others involved vivisection or operations with no anesthesia, putting them in a pressure chamber to see how much a human can withstand before bursting, or live weapons testing. It is hard to even believe that this is a real thing that happened, and we honestly can't even begin to imagine what those people were forced to face during that time. After World War II, however, the United States gave immunity to Shiro Ishii, who is the Japanese Army medical officer responsible for lethal human experimentation and biological warfare projects. Many of these experiments he conducted just to see what would happen. Why not? American scientists decided that this information would be valuable, so they decided to give him immunity in exchange for the information on chemical and biological warfare. Shiro was never tried for his crimes. Alright guys, that has been our list for today. Thanks so much for checking it out. I've been your host today, Olivia Kozlowski, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye!